We are talking with the director for Good Time Call. Pleasure to talk to you. I was wondering, you came from a short film background, and this is your first full-length feature film. It's more of an independent film. What was the transition like for you to step onto this bigger role?
Well, the transition was surprisingly smooth. I mean, I've said many times, I approach any project, whether it's a short film or a commercial or a music video, or in this case, a feature film, as the same thing. It's a project that needs to be executed in a certain way to be the best version of itself. And so, you know, my job was the same as it's always been. I mean, I come from a background where I've been making short films in Canada for the last 10 years. They're all very personal and very visual and very art direction driven. They're really art films. And so I remember when I read this script, I was so excited at how it kind of found a balance between kind of personal storytelling and a fresh take on female sexuality and female friendship, but it was also, you know, a pretty broad commercial comedy that could, you know, and I felt that the balance of that was so great. And if I were ever going to make a commercial film, it couldn't just be a full-on Adam Sandler movie.
Yeah.
It needed to kind of have this balance.
Okay, so you still had a very restricted time period and a small budget to get this made.
Yeah.
Probably kind of like your short films. So how was it working with that kind of scenario?
It's funny, some of my short films actually had more luxurious budgets and schedules. Well, my first short film, Why the Anderson Children Didn't Come to Dinner, which I made in film school, was a 16-minute film that I shot in 16 days.
Okay.
So to shoot 90 minutes in 16 days, just to give you some perspective.
Yeah.
You know, I think that the budget and schedule constraints were a blessing for us in some ways. First of all, it brought us all together with a very independent spirit that I think bonded us. It forced us to make the script the leanest version of itself. I mean, I remember when I came down to LA and I was working with Lauren and Katie Anne Nylon, the co-writer, and Ari. I remember we had this great collaborative period of reworking the script, doing reads of the script. We had to get rid of characters, we had to get rid of locations, we had to get rid of 20 pages. And I think, you know, the first time I read the script, I recognized that the best thing about it was Lauren and Katie and their friendship. And I thought that it represented something very universal. And so it was a real blessing to have to kind of strip away some of the elements that were kind of there just for comedy's sake, or the kind of, you know, so what we have ended up with is a really kind of refreshingly straightforward story with a very simple premise. It's funny because we've gotten a lot of feedback. People have been comparing us to old Doris Day movies, and I think some of that comes from the simple sweetness of the film. And I think that our independent status and our budget and our schedule, you know, I think it pushed us in a good direction. I want a lot more money and a lot more time next time, but I think it was a blessing on this one.
So when you first got into Sundance Film Festival, what was that like for you?
Amazing. I mean, I've had films play at Sundance before, but, you know, I wasn't sure about this one. I was nervous because I had never made something for such a broad audience. And so, you know, I wasn't sure if Sundance was going to dig it, if this was going to be more of a Sundance thing or more of a wide commercial release thing. And, you know, it was a real vote of confidence that they liked it, and that even these, you know, very esteemed, very intelligent, very educated curators, programmers liked our raunchy comedy. It was, you know, such an amazing moment to kind of realize that we did find that balance that we were aiming for.
What was it like? Was that the first time you had screened it with an audience? Was that Sundance?
Yeah.
So what was that like? What was the response?
I think it might have been the best day of my life. I'm
really?
not sure. I've been thinking about this. The last person I talked to, I said it might be the best day of my life, but I'm thinking about it. I don't know that there's been a better day than that. Because, I mean, I've always been confident about this film because I read the script and saw how special it was. So I know the girls they're closer to it, you know, especially Lauren and Katie who wrote it. But I've always recognized that if we execute this in the right way and find that balance of raunch and comedy, that this is going to be a film that people want to watch. I mean, we screened it at Sundance to 1,300 people in the largest venue, and people were laughing so hard I couldn't even hear the movie. Even when the movie started, even things that weren't meant to be funny, they were laughing.
Yeah.
And so it was very clear, it's very clear, it was very clear at the very beginning that they were on board. Yeah. It's funny because I've made a bunch of films. I consider all of my films comedic in some ways, but I've made some that are kind of more outwardly comedic and some that are a little more reserved in their comedy, a little more deadpan. And I have to say, as a filmmaker, it is to make a comedy and watch it with an audience, it's the reassurance of laughter is so huge. And when you make a drama or something that is more of a skewed comedy, it's a more reserved reaction that they have, and they're not sure if they should laugh. And it's funny, we show the film in Minneapolis, which is kind of the most reserved city that we've shown it in. I mean, in Chicago and Dallas and Seattle, people are hooting and hollering and yelling at the screen, and it's funny because the reaction in Minneapolis was kind of closer to the reaction that I'm used to for my previous films. But it was an amazing moment. Many tears were had. I remember, I felt very strong that day. I remember at Sundance. I remember before we went out to the theater, I think the girls were getting really emotional, and the stakes were so high, and we were putting ourselves out on the line here to 1,300 people, and it was the first time that any audience over 10 people had seen the film, and it was proven that day that it really was an audience pleaser.
What was it like to have Focus approach you about the film and buying it?
Well, Focus Features, I have to say, is probably my favorite distributor of all. So, and we had joked before, like, we'll go to Sundance and Focus Features will buy us. And I never thought that was I thought that if we were gonna get bought, we were gonna get bought by a more kind of traditional commercial studio, not the people who released Brokeback Mountain and Lost in Translation. But it really was the best scenario for me and for all of us, and they've been so collaborative with us in kind of moving from Sundance and onward to our commercial release. We made a few editorial changes, very small, all of which I think made the film stronger. So they have a great creative voice there, and in terms of our marketing and our poster, and they're so good.
Yeah. What's next for you? I'm sure this has opened some doors.
It has opened doors. Well, what's immediately next for me is that I'm moving to Los Angeles.
Okay.
So I live
the big move.
The big move is happening, but I kind of feel like I've been living in Los Angeles. My heart has been in Los Angeles for a few years now, and we shot this film in Los Angeles. So, it's where increasingly my friend base is and my professional base is. So I'm moving to LA. I'm pursuing a few projects. But specifically, there's one that I can't tell you about.
Okay. My
fingers are very tightly crossed. I want it so badly. Don't tell the girls this. I think it's the best script I ever read.
Okay.
But it represents. I really want to kind of find a balance between the kind of broad commercial quality of this film, For a Good Time Call, and the kind of more personal, art-driven stuff of my previous films, and kind of like meet somewhere in the middle. So I have a feeling what I do next might be for a bit of a smaller, more specific audience, but I kind of want to get back to my roots for the next one, and kind of take all the things that I've learned from this film and apply it to maybe something a little darker, a little more twisted.
Well, is it something that a screenplay's already written, or are you working on writing something?
There is a screenplay that I want very badly, but I feel like I'm jinxing myself. Is there some wood in here?
Well, thank you so much, Jamie. Really appreciate it.
So nice to meet you.